Guy Powell. And Charlie is from Atlanta. Martyr, historian, Christian, author of The Only Witness. You're going to group up, Chris, back The Only Witness? Yes, we'll get here all day. Nerd bath book. So, done a lot of research on the Shroud, and for the last 5 years or so, what you're supposed to on the Shroud. Following and that's the mercy. Jesus. That is what he is going to talk about. Please welcome to Guy Powell.
So, let me tell that though.
Oh, no.
Very good. Let me just tell a quick story. I was, so I wrote my book 4 or 5 years ago, Late Schlug, The Only Written. It's on sale now outside. But I wrote the book 4 or 5 years ago, and as a marketer, I get involved in a handful of different marketing and press-related things. And I was at this function, and it was where you could pitch an idea to a handful of editors, and they would, if they liked your idea, they would write a story about it, or potentially even put you on the radio or TV. And I wasn't really prepared to do that. And I sat there, and there were some pitches going on. And they said, "I'm going to pitch my book. Let's see what happens." And so then I had like a few minutes. I was writing down while the other pitches were going on. And one of the hard things about the press is you got to hook them early. You got to hook them early. And so what I did, I started out, and I got up there like this, and I looked, one of the people in the audience, right in the face, and I said, and by the way, this is more of a secular audience, right? And so this is a secular audience, and I said, what is the world's greatest mystery? And they looked at me, like, what's he talking about? We're trying to sell, medical devices. We're trying to sell, something else. And then I repeat, I let that hang in the air for a little bit. And then about 5, maybe 10 seconds, I don't know, you're nervous, and 5 seconds feels like, 5 minutes. And I then go, what is the world's greatest mystery? And then I let that sink in a little bit. And then I said, it's the Shroud of Turin. How many of you heard of that? How many of you here of the Shroud of Turin? Maybe 4 or 5 people raised their hands, right? And well, let me tell you about this, because the Shroud of Turin incorporates the world's greatest mystery. And that's kind of how I like to start my talk slow. Now, unfortunately, I'm really going to be talking about the Shroud as a reflection of the Gospels. And so I'm going to go through the Gospels, and then we're going to see how the Shroud is, each of the things that are on the Shroud you can see as documentation written in the Gospels. Now, the other piece about it, though, I'm going to do is I'm going to also look at how the Old Testament, of course, lines up with the New Testament and lines up with the Shroud. It's kind of like the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the future Testament. And so anyway, let's get started. All right, so I want to do it. Maybe I did the other one. I love these clickers here. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks. There we go. Oh, here it is. Now, of course, we know the Shroud. You've got it over here. We don't have to see this. But I think what's interesting about the Shroud, and this one thing amazes me, and when I think about what happened in Desert Storm and with our military, right? And I am the good shepherd. Your good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. When people are willing to sacrifice their lives for us, it's amazing. And when I see somebody that was in the military that was willing to do that, I'm floored by that. I'm absolutely floored at that. So Jesus did that. He sacrificed his life for us. Now let's go back to Isaiah. One of my favorite books, by the way. If I had to choose 5 books out of the Gospels, out of the Bible. I would choose Isaiah, and then of course from your Gospel, right? And here, 53 free, surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. On the shroud, we see documented 100 and some odd whip marks, and many of those are in threes because the whip had three little talons on the end of it. So there's actually 300 marks on it. But the shroud doesn't include every one of the whip marks, because the shroud only looks at the ones that you can see on the front and on the back. It doesn't count all the ones on the sides. And we can't see the arms. So there's probably another, 50, maybe 75. The normal way that in Judaism is that you would limit, in the Old Testament, you're supposed to limit the whippings to 40, and they always count to 39 just in case they miscount. I mean, I don't know about you, but I used to be able to count to like 1 million without a problem, and today I barely get 20 without messing something up. So they always only go to 39 because they're afraid of making a mistake. And here we have at least 100, if not maybe 150 whip marks on it. Just incredible. So he was stricken and punished by God, but he was pierced. We know he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and his wounds we are healed at. And I don't know about you, but I'm in the choir, and we sing the Messiah, and then there's that one song, we are healed at, is way out for house. So I can't read that for some reason without doing it, he led. Okay, so he was led like a lamb to the slaughter, right? He was led, he didn't really resist, right? And as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. And we see that in the Gospels. It's just amazing how Isaiah, 700 years before this event, he's writing about what's going to happen. He was assigned a grave with the wicked. So on his right and on his left are the two thieves. And with the rich in his death, he's buried in a rich tomb. And though he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. The Lord makes us light an offering for sin. He offered up his life for us. But he didn't just let himself be killed. He was punished. He was beaten. He was stabbed. He was pierced. I mean, it's incredible the pain that this man is suffering. And when I listen to the different talks that are given, it seems like every time I hear a new talk, there's a new pain that was inflicted. So just as an aside, one of the ones, he is held like this, his knees are bent like this. 3 hours. Can you imagine how much pain? And he has to lift up the breeze. So 3 hours, he's holding like this. His thighs must have been burning like you can't believe. And so every time you think about what he went through, there's another set of pain that we find out about. I'm going to skip over a couple of slides. I really like this image, but nevertheless, we're going to go a little further. The Garden of Gethsemane. What happened in the Garden of Gethsemane? Here he is. He's praying to God. There's a couple of the disciples at that moment, and they fall asleep. But one of the things about the Last Supper in generally, and this is one of the things that I found out as I was researching for my book, is that you can't drink the water. Nobody drinks water. You have to have something that kills the germs. Most of the time, it's wine. Sometimes it's vinegar, but most of the time it's wine. So everybody's drunk. Everybody's drunk, especially the Roman soldiers. They're all drunk because they can't drink the water. They have to have the blue wine. And we'll see also how important that is when he's at the cross and he's offered something to drink. So the start of the Passion, here they are, the three disciples can't stay awake. Well, they had wine for dinner. I don't know about you, but when I had wine for dinner, man, I'm ready to go to bed. So now the other thing that happened is that he starts to sweat, drops of blood falling to the ground, overwhelmed with sorrow, to the point of death. To the point of death with sorrow. Now, one of the things that I found out yesterday, I didn't know this until yesterday, sorrow is going to be a very important emotion that's on his face when he dies. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so he has blood coming from his face and sweat. And there's some theories, which I don't think any of us anymore, but some of the old theories were, well, he sweat blood, and that's then where the image came from, blood and sweat. And I think that's definitely been ruled out. Okay, the arrest and trial. So he gets arrested. He goes before Annas. He goes before Pilate, says, blah, blah. And it would be good if one man died for the people. So here they are. We all know this. Somebody's got to die. And they really want Jesus to die. Now, the other two are, they're thieves. And in order to be crucified, as we get further into this, you have to commit a really high crime. It's not just, it's not just a simple crime of stealing something. You have to commit a really big crime. Now, the other two are called thieves. So I don't quite understand what crime that they did that was as big as what Jesus was convicted of doing, not necessarily that he actually did. So here he is before Pilate. Now, in reality, a lot of these paintings, and I love these old paintings, but they do get a lot of the details wrong. They would, so they have Jesus, and he's in front of Caiaphas here. And I'll talk about some of the things and some of them get wrong. Okay, so we have his condemnation. Oh, I'm sorry about that. This is the, oops, I'm going the wrong way. How we go back? 2 to 3 a.m. So he's been awake since the morning. Most of the people we wake up, 6 o'clock with the sun, right? So it's now 2 or 3 a.m. He's been up all that time, stressed out like you can't believe. He was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and now, before Annas, it's 2 to 3 a.m., he probably has not slept. So that's another thing that he has to suffer through when he gets on the cross. And for me, when I don't sleep, I know for a fact if my blood pressure goes up, if I only get 5 hours of sleep, my blood pressure is up by 10 or 12 points or so. And not necessarily a good thing. I wish I could get 8 hours, and unfortunately, here he's got none. So if his blood pressure is up, he's in sorrow, everyone has deserted him, and he's now in front of the high priest. Okay. So now we're at 5 a.m. Luke 23:22. He is blamed for opposing the payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Messiah, a king. Well, Caesar is the king. It's not Jesus. We know that, right? And that right there is a high crime. We have in our Constitution a high crime and misdemeanor. He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. Again, reinforcing the fact that it's a high crime. If he was blamed for being, well, he just stole this or he stole that, he wouldn't be crucified. It has to be a high crime. Now, the thing that's wrong on this picture is, who knows what it is? The Jews, to stay clean, couldn't go inside. They have to be outside, because if you go in as a Jew, Jesus was a Jew, and the Jews were Jews, of course, and they would not go inside. So in reality, where Pilate would actually come out to meet the Jews, and he had to have a chair or something to sit on outside so that the Jews could then be able to talk to him directly. They couldn't go inside. Okay. And now, of course, Pilate, he doesn't want to convict him. He doesn't see any crime that the man done. And his wife, of course, was, basically believed in him. So she's probably pulling on his, whispering in his ear, no, he's not. So I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility. He's trying now to blame it on the Jews, right? You brought to this man who was inciting the people to rebellion. That is critical for crucifixion. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him. So he punishes him. And now this is from, the movie The Passion, and by Mel Gibson, and, with him being whipped by two people. When we look at the shroud, and the blood marks have been enhanced in this one, we can see that there's kind of two angles coming in. And one of the angles coming in is a little bit from a man that might be taller than the other one. So you can see then that there's two different people whipping. And look at all those marks on there. And on the back. And then this is, you've probably seen pictures here. That's the flag room. I think there's an example in the exhibition. And it has these two little balls on them. And there's three sets of them. And so that's what he whipped with. Now, that's just the whipping, right? Now, he's being claimed to be the king of the Jews. And so they said, well, let's make him a king. Let's put a crown on him. There's nowhere else in history that we know of that a man was crucified with a crown on, a crown of thorns. Now, as Father Dalton mentioned, it's most likely a cap, because in the shroud there's the blood marks that are on the top of the head as opposed to just on the side. And this image here, I always wondered as I was writing my book, I was wondering how did they actually place the crown of thorns? Those thorns are like 2 inches long, sharp and stiff as anything, and they have to somehow push these things on. And I was thinking they had really super thick leather gloves. And then when I finally saw this picture, I said, aha, that's how they're doing it. They're using these little things to push it on the steel. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I fell off my bike, and I have a little scar right there, when I was a little kid, and man, it hurt like anything. And what's interesting is if you get, let's say, a thorn in your arm or a thorn in your hand, it hurts. But it does not hurt anywhere near as much as as something on your skull. It hurts a lot. So they clearly know that that's then in another way that they can inflict an enormous amount of pain. And personally, I think this drawing is probably wrong. They probably do have leather lugs on in addition to those steel rods pushing down. And so they twisted together a crown of thorns, and this is then an image from the Notre Dame crown of thorns. Now that one is a little bit interesting. So if it was a cap of thorns, maybe they had pieces going this way, and then this one they kind of tied it all around. Maybe, I mean that's just an idea. And put it on his head, and then they slapped him in the face, right? And then we're going to see on the shroud that that he has then different bruises on his face and on his cheeks. Now, it's possible, nobody really knows, but it's possible that those bruises might have come from when he fell on the Via Dolorosa. Okay? All right, so, and then finally Pilate handed him over to be crucified, and so now he has to carry the cross along Via Dolorosa, and this thing is heavy. Now, there's different theories as to whether it was a full cross. For the moment, we're going to assume it's the full cross. Personally, it's probably just the cross D. But nevertheless, a lot of the imagery has him, carrying the full cross. The full cross is it's like 150 kilos. I've just been whipped like crazy. I got this crown of thorns on here. How am I going to be able to carry something that's, in the hundreds of kilos? Kilos, not pounds, kilo. Just the timbulum, that's this piece here, the cross piece, is probably maybe 100 pounds itself. So one of the things that's kind of funny is as we understand it, he falls. How many times does he fall in the Bible? How many? 0. There is nothing in the Bible that says that he fell. There's tradition. It's the tradition that he fell 3 times. We always, it's funny how we do the Stations of the Cross, right? And we go, and then he fell, and we go, and he fell. He didn't fall at all in the Bible. It's 0. And so it's kind of fun to see that. But he did fall. And there's evidence on the shroud that he fell. So when we look at the knees, and if you get a chance, look maybe over there, but on his knees, there is dust. And there's the dust that you would find in Palestine. And it's, that special kind of dust, and it's on his knees. So here he is. He's most likely carrying just the crossbeam. And when he falls, he's probably going to fall with his knee. But then if his hands are tied up, he has no way to break his fall for his face. And he falls maybe, I think, I would probably fall, on one side, maybe try and back, and then, but I fall and then I land right on my face. And there's dust on the tip of his nose. So there's proof on the shroud that he fell onto his knees, most likely. I mean, he could have been on his knees for other reasons, okay? But there's proof on the shroud that there's dust on his knees, and there's proof on the shroud that there's dust on his nose. So he clearly somehow got dust on his nose. Now, it could have been that maybe it got there from when they were taking him down from the cross. I mean, a heavy body we get down from the cross is not an easy thing. But, one theory is that he fell onto his knees. We know that he fell based on tradition. And we know that he, fell 3 times. So most likely, he may have fallen backwards. I don't know. Fell forward and then landed on his knees and then most likely on his nose. And if we look at the shroud, and I'll be honest with you, I can't see it on here, but, right near it where his knees are, there's been dust. Okay. So how did you get down there? Now, down to the Golgotha, or down to down to Calvary, and so they forced him to carry a cross. That's where they tied him on. Now, in one theory, he's tied on to what's called the Pitbibulum. That's the cross beam. And then one theory, there's many different theories of what the crosses look like. And then this is the stipes, the centerpiece here. And there may or may not have been a footrest there, and there may or may not have been a room for the Titulus Crucis, that's in where it says Jesus of Nazareth. I have written what I have written. Don't take it, leave it that way. He's not King of the Jews. So it's, INRF is the Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And so he's carrying the cross, like I mentioned. May or may not yet be nailed to it. Probably isn't nailed to it yet. It's probably just tied to it. And he walks down. Now, the way that I've envisioned this, and I've seen, there's so many different theories, but the way I envision it is he's tied like this. And by the way, the Romans are experts at their craft. And they are experts because if they fail, if the guy does not die, if he's not dead, they get killed. So it's either my life or your life. Well, I'm going to make sure he dies, and I'm going to make it easy. So what they did, what I believe they did, is there's a little hole in the crossbeam, and he's tied to it like this, and then they lift him up, and they place him back onto the post like that. And then after he did that, then they nailed the sign right there. That's one theory. There is evidence on the shroud. There's evidence on the shroud across the back, and where the whip marks are kind of smudged, but not as clear and crisp as they are on the legs or other placings on the cross. They're smudged, and so that's one theory, is that that's where he was carrying the patibulum across his back. Okay. So the crucifixion foretold, like I said, I love Isaiah, those Psalms. Who doesn't like Psalms, right? Psalm 22:1, my God, why have you forsaken me? Well, we know we're going to hear that in a minute. They pierced my hands and my feet. How could they have known? They pierced my hands and my feet, written hundreds of years before the actual event. Just amazing, but it's so cool. You have something written hundreds and hundreds of years before, and then it actually happens. I mean, it's just amazing. And what a way to really connect the Old Testament with the New Testament, and then the shroud being kind of future. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. We know that happened. They cast lots for the garment. He protects all his bones. Not one of them will be broken. Now, we'll notice on the shroud and the face, when you go over to there, you're going to see a pretty big lump on his nose. And so, okay, did the nose get broken? Was it the bone of his nose, or was it the cartilage of his nose? And so that's kind of like a technical detail. So none of his bones will be broken. Most of the time when we talk about that, it's about the chloropragma, where they're trying to break the shins. But nevertheless, this nose is that high likelihood broken. All right, so here he is. We've now gone through the whole day, the whole night, and now we're at waking up in the morning. It is 8 a.m. Soldiers crucified Jesus. They took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. And then the garment was seamless, woven in one piece, and blah, blah, blah. Let's decide by lot who will get it. It's hard. It just amazes me how well the Old Testament and the New Testament come together. Okay. Now he's on the cross, and there's two other men on there. One of them, the penitent thief, Dismas, and then the other one. And we read what he says, don't you fear God, since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong. And Jesus answered him, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. For me, and hopefully I will be faithful till I'm on my deathbed. Hopefully I will not fall away. But for those that have either never been with Christ and come on their deathbed, Jesus will save them too. He will save us, but he will save those on their deathbed that said, yes, I do believe in you. And here is proof. He did this with Dismas. He actually becomes sainted. And he's got the little nimbus around his head. That's what that round thing is called. It's called hair. And he becomes sainted with that. Now, what's interesting, though, I did have to, think about it, and that's certainly time and maybe just the way things are written. So in the Apostles' Creed, we read, he descended to the dead. On the third day, he rose again. He ascended into heaven. And that's a little bit of contradiction to that last sentence. Truly, I tell you, today. Well, Jesus ascends 3 days later, so there's a little bit of a time difference there. I'm gonna forgive the apostles for what they wrote. Not that I'm the right one to do that, but it's just funny. I like to find the little differences in there and make sure it's just to understand it further. Now, the other thing that's interesting in here, we see him being pierced by the lance in his side, and we see the angle with which he's up there. Well, in my case, and most likely, if he's just standing here, he's going to put on the cross, and then they'll lift his feet up, I guess, and then nail his feet on, and so he's really at eye level. He's not up, 20, 30 feet. And so in some respects, then a lot of the European drawings then kind of get that a little bit longer. All right, so this is now, we've done from 8 a.m. Now we're at 3 p.m., right? Final moments. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Right out of Psalms. He's offered... he says something. When some of those standing near heard this, they said, listen, he's calling Elijah. One of the things I heard yesterday, that's a theory, it could be right, could be wrong, is that when you're suffering and under stress like this, you're going to have a heart attack. And it might be that he then burst out with a noise, because that's part of the suffering after the heart attack. Whether he had it then or not, noise, right? And then so that might have been part of the way that he was dying, which was most likely due to either a heart attack or something related to the heart. They fill a sponge with wine vinegar. And, I always wondered about that. Why is it wine vinegar? Until I started researching for my book and realized that they have to have something in there that kills the germs in the water. So if they were going to be they knew the women at the foot of the cross, and Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, they knew they were going to be there a long time, and so they probably carried some water with them, because you got to drink something. And the water in their minds is water with some wine, or water with some vinegar, or water with both. And so they filled the sponge with wine vinegar, and then they were going to give them that. And so that's then the reason why that piece is there. And then, so there it is, with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. Okay, and we know about the breaking of the legs. He was already dead, and the Romans, if he doesn't die on the cross, and if he is allowed to live, then they'll be killed. So they stab him, pierce him in his side, make sure he's dead, blood and water flow out, and we see that blood and water evidence on his side, on this side, and then it flows around his back as they're rolling him around, and there's, but all of that evidence for that piercing is directly on the shroud. Okay, so they pierce him. Nicodemus is sent to Pilate to get the body back. They kill the bones. They break the bones of the two criminals so that they'll die more quickly, and they pierce his side, and then not one of his bones will be broken. So we know that, and from the shroud as well, we know that his shins are not broken. We can see them right there. He was already dead. Whereas the two criminals, they had to actually speed up their deaths because the Jews didn't want them on the Sabbath to be hanged on a cross. Okay. The descent from the cross. We've got about 10 minutes. So that's about now 6 p.m. So 3 o'clock, 6 p.m. It's starting to get dark, and of course, the Jews want to. It's getting ready for Sabbath and the next day, so they want to get done. And so this is kind of the story in John of Joseph of Arimathea, Pilate, and then the 75 pounds of aloes and myrrh, and with the spices and strips of linen in accordance with Jewish burial customs, everything that we just heard with Andrew Dalton. And what's interesting is, how prepared were they for this crucifixion? I mean, where do you get 75 pounds of aloes and myrrh, on the spur of the moment? Because it was just going to be convicted, from the night before. And if they were up all night with him, then where are they going to get this? So they've got to figure out where you get this. And the same thing with the cloth. Now, where did they get the cloth right away? So we know that Joseph of Arimathea, after he gets the body, he gets the cloth, and I think actually I might be one slide ahead. But they have to get this stuff and be prepared. Now, Barry Schwartz, he would say that as a good Jew and a rich Jew, Joseph of Arimathea was already prepared for death. And so he had already bought, the aloes maybe. He had already bought the cloth. And so it was already ready. You just had to go home or send somebody home. You go get your foil and bring it. In my book, I kind of do it a little bit differently. I have somebody running around trying to buy a cloth, and it's kind of a fun story. And it takes you through Jerusalem at that time, on that day, and totally the streets are filled with people, right? And they're carrying in all of their offerings. All right. So Joseph bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in the linen, and placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Now, one of the things that's kind of funny is took down the body and wrapped it in linen. So this artist is wrapping the body at the foot of the cross. And it's kind of a misunderstanding there, or a misread of that, because they probably somehow, and don't really know how they carried the body the 150 feet from Golgotha over to the tomb. How did they carry him there? And then they put him in the fall. So it seems like it's a little bit off, but maybe not. Took down the body, wrapped it and placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Now, interestingly, yesterday, I was pretty amazed, but one of the challenges you have, especially now as you're getting dark, is you can't see what's going on in the tomb. It's a cave, right? There's no light in there. It's not like you can hit the switch and turn the light on. So they have to have torches, or somebody's got to hold torches or whatever. And so that's kind of one thing that I wonder about. Was there carbon potentially from those torches that landed on the shroud? I don't think there's any evidence of that. Would be interesting to find out. But nevertheless, they had to have light to be able to see at night in the tomb. But the interesting thing that I found out yesterday is most likely the entrance to the tomb was facing east. So when we get to the next couple of slides, the sun is pointing this way and into the tomb, and there's actually now light for the women to work inside the tomb, and because it's facing east. Kind of interesting. All right, so in reality, this is a little bit confusing here. He was most likely, the shroud was put on him when was laid down first on the bench in the tomb, and then the body was placed on it. Now, one thing that's kind of fascinating, and I don't know how they did this, but John Jackson pointed this out, and the body is perfectly centered on the wall. And you're in a tomb, and I'm a tall guy. I don't know, maybe they had to duck a little bit, then they had to carry and hold on to a man that's 175 pounds maybe, and somehow get it so that it's perfectly aligned on the cloth. And here they are, they're doing that because he is, of course, the King of the Kings. And they are giving him a royal burial as best they can do it. So they have the cloth perfectly lined up. And I just find that just amazing. And, so that's kind of one of the facts that you kind of see from the shroud that isn't mentioned in the Bible. Okay, so now Andrew Dalton, I'm stealing some of his stuff, and he didn't talk about it as much. And but I like it. He did this thing on how you see. So listening, from John 23 to 10, we have Peter and John. Which one is the oldest? Which one is the youngest? Peter's the old one. John is probably the youngest, the beloved, of course. And who would outrun Peter? Well, John would. So he got there first. Right? So figure the other disciples started where the tomb, both were running, but the disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, and that's the Aphonian that Andy was talking about. The strips of linen lying there, and he says, well, and the original there's no there there, and there is no there, he said, which is kind of interesting. And he did not go in. So here he is now. It's the sun is over here, and he's looking into the tomb, and he's leaning over because the door is not full height. He's leaning over, and he's looking in, and he sees the strips of linen lying there. Then Simon Peter came along, probably panting, comes in, and Simon, being the brash one, he just runs right in, right? And so John is here, and Peter has a drum, and he saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. So there's two cloths, at least. There's strips of linen, and then there's two cloths, and then lying there, the one that was over his face. And here they are. They're probably working on the myrrh and the body and the cloth, and then they take the Sudarium, the face cloth off, and then they probably put it right on the bench right next to it. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen, so that's the face cloth. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside, and he saw and believed. He saw and believed. And this one, the way Andrew Dalton tells it, is just amazing. I'm going to try and be my best. They still did not understand, which is just crazy. Parenthetically, they still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciple went back to where they were staying. Okay. So the first C is the Greek word blepo, and that means to see with your eye. So they're seeing, they're looking, they're absolutely seeing with their eye. He saw the strips of linen lying there. It uses theoreo, and which kind of means, it almost sounds like the root of theater, and they're kind of observing, right, as opposed to necessarily trying to see directly with their physical eyes. But the one that's really good is horao, and that's it also means to see with your eyes, but quite often it's used to see with the mind, and that's why that's translated as saw and believed. They saw with their mind, and they go. And Andrew, says this is the first time that somebody finally died. Jesus had to rise. He had to pay the ultimate price, the suffering, the pain that he went through, and then he was risen. And that they saw and they believed. I don't know about you, but I think that is one of the most powerful passages. Okay. Then there's a couple of other things. This is, by the way, the Sudarium. So this is the face cloth that was sort of over the head, and it was folded. And then if you get a chance, take a look at it and read the story about it. It's pretty fascinating. If you'll notice, there's all of these fold parts up here, and so most likely it was tied in a nut in the one pointer here to keep it on the face. Now there's a handful of other theories, and one thing I joke about the shroud is that there is absolutely nothing controversial with the shroud. And I think we all would notice. I do want to do one thing before I go on, and that is, if you were going to ask the new Pope, Pope Leo, if you were going to ask him to do something special with the shroud, whatever it is, what would you ask him? What would you ask him? So keep that in mind. Think about that. When we were done, thank you. When we're done, then we'll go. I'll get some of your answers. Okay. So then, of course, we have Dabbing Thomas, and I think this painting is just absolutely awesome. He sticks his finger into the wound. I want to see, that. And then Jesus tells him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." That is me. I have not seen and yet I believe. I would venture to say that none of you have seen and yet you believe. And so we have not seen and yet we believe. We absolutely believe in the price that Jesus paid for us to redeem us of our sinful ways, and that and the shroud is then the proof of that payment that was made. So that's it. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Just quick question. Psalm 22 was written around as period today. Is there any historical evidence crucifixion took place in that time?
Very good question. I don't know, but I'll look that up because I didn't.
Did we hear the question over here? Okay. You might just reiterate what he said.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. So he asked, Psalm 22, most likely written by David, were there crucifixions that go back to the time of David? And I don't know, but excellent question. I will definitely look that up. I say very interesting question. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Let me bring the mic too.
The first crucifixions were actually different. They would take a person and push him onto a tree or impale it on a tree. That was the first crucifixions. It wasn't. I don't believe it was until several hundred years before Christ that they perfected this thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. One of the things, if you think about Jerusalem, there's not that many trees around. There are not that many trees around. So for a tree to be used for crucifixion, that's a big thing. And so to your point, that's kind of interesting that, the original ones were done with a tree. And so where are they going to get the trees? Where are they going to get the wood? So they had, the Romans, at least during the first century, they kind of do have to do that. Yes, sir.
Hang on, let me bring a mic in. So while I come over here, I would ask the Holy Father, how about another SERP investigation?
All right, very good. That's one. Definitely that.
So I've always imagined that the 75 pounds of spices were in the cave, but a couple of times this week it's been implied that they carried with the body to the cross.
Yeah, certainly there's no evidence either way. There's nothing written in the Gospels. It would seem to me that they wouldn't put that on, and you'd want to carry it separately because, you're on Golgotha, it's kind of hilly, and you got to go up and down and whatever. So it would seem to me you'd want to put that on at that point of preparation. There's like a slab outside of the tomb where most likely the body was prepared, and it may have been on there that they put maybe some of it. Now, one other thing, by the way, on the myrrh, there was a woman that asked Barry Schwartz one time. He says, "Hey, when you were in the presence of the shroud, did you smell anything? What did the shroud smell like?" And unfortunately, Barry was a smoker, so I think it didn't smell very well. But nevertheless, he said, "Well, I don't remember. I don't recall anything." There is a writing from a guy, Nicholas Meserides. He was the guy in charge of the relics of Constantinople in the 1100s, and he says there is a faint scent of myrrh on the shroud at that time, 1,000 years later. So definitely there was myrrh somewhere in the tomb or somewhere on the body. Oh yeah, yes, sir.
So I think you mentioned that there was Palestinian dust on the knees and the nose. What's Palestinian dust?
Yeah, so travertine aragonite, and now I'm not a scientist, but they have certain different amounts of, I think it was strontium and some of the other elements in there, and so then you can kind of test it to be from a certain area, and it's kind of like, well, it could have been somewhere else, but it kind of overlaps with where you could find that particular dust with those particular molecules and the elements. Apparently, though, there's one, you can find that same amount of dust in South America. And I think we're pretty certain that it didn't go to South. Thank you. Yes, sir.
As an author, you've written a fictional novel. What inspired you to do that as opposed to a non-fiction novel?
Oh, thank you so much. So, blatant plug, The Opening Witness on sale now. My brother, about 20 years ago, well, so, stepping back, 1978, Stirp took place, and really, some fascinating stuff. I remember reading in Time magazine, shows my age, and I remember reading some fun stuff. Wow, that is really cool. And then in 1988, they did the radiocarbon testing, and I said, oh, there goes that one, right? And I lost total interest in it, didn't really see anything to even spend time on it. 1998, the fire in the Turin chapel, in the Guari chapel, and you can see Mario Trematore carrying the casket that holds the shroud inside, and he's carrying it out, and he had just fought, and this is one of the stories in my book, he had just fought. One of the things that's funny is the casket of the shroud was in a tomb of glass to protect it from damage. And here, the tomb that it was in had to be broken down, had to be smashed. He's like banging on this thing with a hammer, and he finally gets it out of that glass. And you can see there's a handful of pictures with the glass all around and stuff like that, and then he finally gets to carry that out. So the thing that was going to protect it was actually almost the cause of his destruction. And so anyway, fast forward, my brother sends me a book. It's Ian Wilson's Blood of the Shroud, and I read this. It's a history book. Well written, really nice. But half the book is in 1356, this happened, in 1357, this happened, in 1358, that happened. I go, somebody needs to write a historical fiction on this to kind of make it readable for the lay person. To make it so that it will actually reach more than just a shroud scientist, and so I wrote my first chapter right there, and then I don't know, life got in the way. My kids were growing up. I was a soccer coach, and finally during COVID, I said I am now going to finish my book, and that's what I did. And one of the things when I was writing my book, I was asked once, so Guy, why are you writing this, Tor? Why are you spending so much time? And I spent a ton of time researching history and getting everything as best as possible. And I started to formulate my my mission of the book, and that was I wanted to convert just one person, just one. Do you know how hard it is to convert somebody? Have you ever walked up to somebody in the street and say, Jesus is here, he's risen. And he's risen. He's for us. He saved you from your sin. I don't know about you guys, but I can't do that. So my goal, though, is with that. So now, in the meantime, I have been invited to give lectures and presentations to pastors in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. I've spoken to about 200 of them, and their goal is to use my presentation to go out and evangelize. And I think that is the coolest thing, and I think I've gotten my one. I'm hoping I've gotten maybe 10. I might actually get 1,000 here. And you have no idea how happy that makes me. So thank you for that question.
Maybe take one more question, and then we'll break for lunch.
Fine.
Thank you for your presentation. I've heard, I don't know if it's maybe just my understanding, maybe how mix it up in my head, but I've heard that the strips of linen were tightly bound around the cloth when they saw it. So that's why they were going, wow, how to get out of their foods. But then the passage looks like it's saying, well, strips of linen that, sorry, yeah, the strips that they used to buy and were like cloths inside. So, which is it? Is it that the bindings were sitting there off the cloth, or were they still around the cloth? Do we know? Is there a way to confirm? Can I say one of the? Yeah. Anyway, I think to me one of the things that stood out to me was just that that really convinced me about it was that. My understanding is, and you'd be correct if I'm wrong, but that those who were crucified were left on the crosses to rot, basically, and then the birds of prey would come and eat them, if you pick them or whatever. You would just sit there for days and days and days until they rotted in the sun. And some people would even see that at the altar, like just a way to say, hey, don't do anything. These guys are not, you're going to end up like they. And so the fact that anyone who's put in a cloth like this have to be crucified just makes absolutely no sense historically. So to me, that was also very convincing that there's something very interesting about the fact that somebody who was crucified was put in a burial cloth and in a tomb. It makes absolutely no sense that historically. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Yeah. So I thought that was pretty.
Yeah, fair enough. And that's why Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, high up Pharisees, wanted to make sure that in our lives, the King of Kings' body is then properly treated. So they definitely took us down. Normally they take the bodies down, just as an aside, and then they just throw them in the dump and let them rot, the ultras, the dogs, and the whatever, just keep, have their so thank you for that. So if you have any other, I'll be right out here. I'd like to get a couple of more suggestions for Pope Leo, so please, thank you very much.
All right, Guy Powell, thank you so much. We will take our break. The accurate noon, straight up. Enjoy.